Hi, Haley. Thank you for
Hello.
joining me.
No worries.
Um,
Um,
so let's start our conversation today with a bit of a primer on yourself and your work. I know you're a director of photography, a cinematographer, but what got you into this work in cinema?
um, yeah, so I went to film school, Toronto Metropolitan University.
Hmm.
Um, and I went into it thinking that I was going to be an editor. And then in second year, I started doing cinematography and I really, really enjoyed it. I'm also like really into visual arts. So I think it translated really well into creating images.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's how I kind of started.
Great. So you always knew that you wanted to be in film somehow, involved in film production somehow.
Hmm.
And what was it about editing at first that piqued your curiosity?
I was like a really big nerd in high school. I got into YouTube at a really long, like when it first came out. So I guess like 2007. I think I
Hmm.
was like in grade eight. So I would make animated music videos, which are just like,
Oh, nice.
yeah, with like television shows. So I really got into that, and then I started a YouTube channel where I like blogged, and I really enjoyed that.
Hmm.
Um, and I would just kind of make movie like dumb little movies with my friends back then. And I found it really enjoyable. So then I was like, okay, I'll go to school for it.
Nice, nice. So a passion, turned into something more than that, and it's kind of part of your livelihood now. So I understand that you were involved with, your colleagues in Metropolitan University, known as Ryerson at the time,
Hmm.
with the short film Gaming Girl. So maybe
Hmm.
let's talk about that first, sort of getting together and talking about creating this short film that now it's spun into a great series.
Yeah. Man, it was so long ago. I've been with this project for like 10 years now. Um, yeah, so we created the short in 2013, and Hayle Zhang, who directed it and is also like the co-creator with me, um, she had written the script back, I think, in like 2012. And then we did it as our third year project.
Hmm.
Um, and we knew it was like special and it was like funny. We also like, it was back in 2013. So, I think some of the stuff was like a little too much for
Hmm.
some people. Um, there's a line that's like fuck straight people, and it really rubbed some of our classmates the wrong way, but
Right.
whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, we created it in 2013, and then we put it online in 2015 and or 2014, 2015, and it just got really big on Tumblr and went
Yeah,
viral, which kind of spawned the whole universe.
it's true.
Um, yeah, so I'm really grateful for it, and it was fun to work on. It was one of the first like narratives that I had shot.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it was a great experience.
For sure. I still came across some TikToks about, Gaming Girl. Like a lot of people were fangirling and vibing over the stories. So,
Mhm.
so you said you've been with it for 10 years and now you're working in a group on this web series, the first season, which is available on YouTube, folks. You should catch up with it. Really gets to a lot of interesting core themes as we grow up in those formative years, right? In like
Mhm.
high school. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to shooting from the short to the first season, and then eventually we can talk about the second, because there's energy throughout the series and its evolution. So I want to hear from you what that's like.
Yeah, I guess it's like a lot. Like when I shot the short, I didn't necessarily have that much experience. I'm still like proud of it because I think I tried a lot of things in
Mhm.
university, which I think is a good idea because it's like easier to fail and not be as exposed.
Mhm.
Um, with the first season, it was the first long format thing that I had ever shot. And so I definitely look back on it and see like a lot of mistakes. I think because we also had like no money,
Mm-hmm.
and like we shot it in 15 days. And so a lot of the time we kind of shot for coverage when it came to the first season. There's
Yeah.
still moments that I'm proud of, and I think what we were able to accomplish with like the time and the money is like
Mm-hmm.
great. But it was also like my first long format thing, so it's difficult for me to look back on it and not see like all the baby type of mistakes that I was making, which at the end of the day were like important because how else do you improve?
Right.
Um, like the process for shooting season one definitely wasn't as intense for shooting season two. I think the prep kind of happened a lot faster. There wasn't enough time to kind of like really try things or like use the camera in a very it was very rarely that we got to use the camera to like do something really special.
Right.
um but it doesn't look terrible, so I'm okay with, I'm happy with that.
Well, it actually looks really good. I actually enjoyed the look of it myself because it also took me back to even when I was younger too, when it was the first same around the same time, with YouTube coming up and how things looked back then, right? So it kind of threw me back to my own youth and
Yeah,
how the look of it was different anyway to us growing up at the time. Can you talk about I know we're talking about the first season still, but sort of what you used sort of as your reference points or
yeah,
influences at the time.
yeah. So uh I was very inspired by To All the Boys I've loved before,
Oh yeah. Hmm.
which had come out I think like the year before, and I really liked it. Like if you look at it, like they kind of everything's kind of really symmetrical,
Hmm.
which I really wanted to do. And like if they walk up close together, they kind of meet in the middle. Um, and To All the Boys I Loved Before was actually shot by a person who normally does horror.
Hmm.
And so I liked that bit of influence. So it was kind of like it was very romantic, but you could see like these like this horror influence come out in the visuals. Um, Virgin Suicides uh, was also a reference for season one. I think that's all I can
Hmm.
remember. There were more, but it was
Those were key
well,
ones.
yeah. To All the Boys I Loved Before was definitely like
For sure.
yeah, I was
And
really into it. So
yeah, and as you mentioned that, and both of them, even with Virgin Suicide, I can kind of pick up on some of the references you're talking about. So thank you for sharing that. So now moving on to, so like you said, you didn't have a lot of time to prep and for the first season, and now you've had a few years in between. I know you've done other work. I also want to mention that you worked on Erin's Guide to Kissing Girls,
mhm.
which I love too. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
So now now you're pulled back into this world again of,
Mhm.
queer youth, high school, a lot of big themes as well are being addressed in season two. I don't want to give too much away. I want people to kind of watch the season. But
Mhm.
what was your preparation like this time around? Did you have a little bit more leeway, a little bit more time, storyboarding? How do you prep?
Yeah, so we had a lot more. I had also like before I shot this season, I had shot Aaron's Guide to Kissing Girls, and then I shot another web series called Less Than Kosher,
Oh, nice.
um, which I'm very proud of both of them. And so I definitely came in this season with like a lot more experience.
Mm-hmm.
But to prep, what I like to do when I prep, and it's kind of how I've worked the past couple of projects, is she's the director. Before we kind of start, we sit down and we go through every single scene and really look at the emotional beats and the most important part of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So that when she's kind of shot listing and we kind of shot list together, we can make sure that the shots are really reflecting kind of what she's trying to say with the whole scene. So we'll do
Mm-hmm.
that. And then kind of build this whole chart and then shot list it all out, and kind of gather references together. Um, and just pass them back and forth and be like, oh, what do you like about this? I like this. And then from
Hmm.
there, just kind of develop a style.
And so let's talk about your style. There's a lot of great colors in the season. There's also a lot of like the movement is different, I find, in the camera work as well, and kind of creating an energy around the central characters and a lot of the themes that they're talking about. Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think for this season specifically, sorry, we wanted the visuals to really enhance this story. And so like season two deals with a lot of dark themes. It's kind of
Mm.
it's sinister. So together, Heishi and I came up with this like neo noir
Mm.
kind of candy pop, like a mix of that.
Yeah.
Because we really wanted it to feel sinister but still be bright and colorful. Kind of feel at moments it should kind of feel like a fun house because
Mm-hmm.
a big part of the season was like trauma, but make it fun.
Mm.
Um, because when you're like going through these like really dark moments, like in the moment, you might A, not even realize how bad it is, and B, like the world keeps moving around you. And so I think it was like important that the visuals kind of show that it's not just dark and dreary and kind of gray.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which I find can sometimes happen when you are tackling such like dark topics.
Exactly, exactly. Um, and I like the way that they're portraying these topics because it's also they're embedded within the sinister energy that you're talking about. There's still some hopeful moments and moments where we see characters kind of coming out of this darkness and kind of pulling through. Um, can you talk a little bit about how you chose your camera angles when you're doing, because there's a section in session in season two where one of the central characters is also trying to use a camera and recording. So what was that like for you in planning those shots?
Um, yeah, like the main character Savannah is a video journalist.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, Heishi and I had kind of come up with this like Y2K aesthetic.
Mm,
Um, one because it's like we think it reflects this trauma but make it fun, but it's also like
right.
a big core part of the season is like when you're going through trauma, kind of your memories are really unreliable. And I think
Yes. Mm-hmm.
having this older technology kind of communicates that and it feels off, which I think
Mm-hmm.
helps. But anyway, she's a video journalist. And so I have a mini DV camera. So it's all shot with mini DV tapes. And I was like, we should just make it look like
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it to feel like an actual teenager was
Mm-hmm.
shooting this content.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of experience like that because I was a teenager who did kind of a similar thing. Um, so it's also like a lot about uh, narrative control.
Right.
So you kind of see Savannah in front of the camera and she doesn't necessarily have all of that control. And then she gets behind it and you think she's going to have control and then she kind of doesn't. So it's kind of
Right.
finding her own style with her own camera. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a character in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like picking the angles, um, do I guess it like would depend kind of on the scene. Like we tried to do a lot of like when I did a close up, like there's in episode 6, it's kind of like uh the set is like out of this world, like it takes place in Savannah's
Mm-hmm.
head. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that, we had some like Dutch angles and we used a lot of like split diopters.
Right.
Um and did some like kind of weirder looking stuff to reflect kind of like the weirdness that was inside of her head.
Mm-hmm. Just to take us into that mindset as well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you were saying, it's the visual, but also complementing the the character's own, I guess, internal processes.
Yeah.
What is it about, gaming girls that spoke to you and that you've been sort of connected to over the last 10 years? in terms of, is it this, what is it in the story that kind of pulled you, in the first place, and kind of you want to still be connected to it?
Yeah, I think for me, it's uh, a lot of it is to do with Heishi, who's the writer and director. I
Hmm.
think she has like a very vulnerable way of telling stories, but they still have kind of this like very campy, kind of kooky vibe,
Mm.
which I find very interesting. Um, because a lot of the times you don't really find projects like that.
Right.
And I think she knows her character so well. So uh, building her vision with her is always quite fun. And
Hmm.
she's and kind of like with Gaming Girls, like every single one we've done, like the stakes have been a little higher. And it
Hmm.
reflects in the work, I think too. Like
Right.
um, going from a short to season one and now season two, um, like the risks that we're willing to take as filmmakers has like continued to grow.
Hmm.
Um, and I also think like the stories are important and they're very like they're kind of like especially with the short and season two and even season one, like I think they're like ahead of their time. Like I think
Right.
they kind of talk about things that aren't necessarily being talked about in that moment.
Right. Hmm.
Um, which I think is important and very,
Hmm.
very interesting to work on and kind of even think about these things myself as a creative.
I think so too, and I was thinking of when the first season came out and the short came out, and the language and the dialogue in them, and how it really, to me, was also ahead of its time. That we're hearing a lot more of that now, especially from
Mhm.
younger people, which I think is really welcomed. And I know it resonates not just for people like me, who's, it's like a throwback to my own youth, but even current young folks. And you've had your team had a nice turnout at TIFF next week when they were doing the presentation for season two. Can you talk about what that's like to experience that with the audience that it's intended to see the series?
Yeah, I mean, it was really overwhelming. I
Hmm.
think, um, I mean, it's great and it's good when like people are like laughing at the right parts and you kind of and I think what was really cool about season two is like when I left the theater, um, there's like groups of people and they were like talking about the series like in a way that was like oh like what not so much like what did you think about this but like kind of like oh, I think that this is the intention behind that character and I think to me that was like really rewarding because it means that people actually like listened and they like understood and
Right.
they were like consuming it um
Hmm.
so I really enjoyed that and like a lot of my crew came out to the screening too which was really
Right.
nice.
Mhm.
I love my crew. They're all my camera crew and my
Of
G&E team.
course. Of course. How big is, so that's another interesting point you mentioned. So you have a crew in season two versus season one. Was that also a difference in terms of how big you were able to have a team with you?
Yeah, like the first season was kind of bare bones. Like we had a first and a second, and then a gaffer slash key grip, and they kind of had dailies. So it was very bare bones.
Mhm.
And this season we were able to have like the first, the second, DIT, key grip, gaffer, and
Nice.
then best electric, best grip, and then a swing. So it was like a fuller crew. It's still not a
Right.
huge crew, but um yeah, and they were very supportive. I think,
Mhm.
they've seen me cry and stuff, so and they still work with me, so it's fantastic.
Yes. So, for people who maybe, younger folks or people who are currently maybe thinking of going into cinema and telling these kinds of stories, what would you share in terms of um, the journey that you've taken and where it's leading and, some words of advice, I guess.
Yeah, I think if you want to get into film, I think it's very scary. I think a lot of it is like don't be afraid of kind of failing.
Hmm.
And also like don't be afraid of trying things. Um, and I think a lot of it too is like building relationships with fellow creators and really
Hmm.
finding like the creators that you really jive with who tell the stories
Right.
that you want to tell instead of
Hmm.
just like kind of taking anything you can, like focusing in on what you want to say and what you want your work to do, I think is really important.
Hmm.
um and I think like don't be afraid to like cry. I think it's like it's a very hard industry,
Hmm.
um especially if you're like marginalized, a woman, queer. Like it can be very difficult. I think it's a little better now than when I was first getting into it. But
Sure.
yeah, I think that would be my best advice. Like
Yeah.
find people. Like I've worked with Heishi for 10 years. And then
Right.
Juliana Naughton, who directed Aaron's Guide to Kissing Girls, I've also worked with her for like 10 years.
Right.
And those relationships are like very special to me and like very important for my own growth.
Hmm.
And you know, they we have really good trust, and I really
Hmm.
appreciate that they kind of let me shoot their work and like try things and like
Right.
explore their work
Hmm.
together because it can be very like vulnerable to make
Absolutely,
movies.
absolutely. And I think vulnerability is important. I think that's also what you were saying. And bringing it back to season two of Gaming Girls, I think it really is about you finding your chosen family too, right? I think it really I appreciated that side of the storytelling in the season. And I also wanted to mention that I do appreciate the perspective that is coming from an Asian queer, you know, crew. I'm not saying everybody in the crew, but
Hmm.
it's kind of nice to see that these stories are being told from people who have this lived experience. So I think you kind of nailed it in sort of saying you're finding your community is very key, whether you're working in cinema, but I think that
Hmm.
expands to anything outside of that as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also like an important thing too is like, and kind of what this season explores is like you might think something's your chosen family, but it
Mm.
might not be, and it's like okay to kind of walk away from that. I think that's like
Hmm.
a big part of it too. But yeah.
That's true. I appreciate the comments even from the first season where there are people like I needed this series when I was younger. What do you say to those comments of people who are like, I wish I had that, but we have it now, and sort of any of the feedback you've heard from the film to now?
Um, so do you mean like people who
Who sort of, even though they may not be in that age group anymore, but it's sort of, I think a lot of people are relating to it. It's like, I wish I had this when I
mm,
was younger, but now we appreciate it with a different perspective,
hmm.
and sort of how it still impacts people, whether you're in that age group or not.
Yeah, I think I understand that. I think for myself too, like it would have been really nice to have something like Gaming Girls when I was kind of 16 as well.
Mhm.
Um, because I think finding yourself is really hard. But also like finding yourself at any age is like
Hmm.
a
Yeah,
challenge.
I was gonna say
Um,
that too. It's a work in
so
progress.
yeah, like everything's always kind of changing and it's very
Hmm.
scary. So I'm like glad it exists for people now and like people kind of coming into their own. I think it's important to have like these types of shows and have um like all types of representation. I think
Hmm. Hmm.
is very important.
Yeah, I think so, and I appreciate the depth of themes and kind of character development too. Even though the series may be 8 episodes, there's still a lot of substance in each season. So I want to congratulate you again on this season, and hopefully we'll see something else